Welcome to the Dr. Junkie Show. I'm Steve Boyce, and I'm here today with Ben Boyce, the originator, the original Doc Junkie.
Hey, everybody.
Just so you know, his name doesn't mean what you think it means.
Welcome. I'm Ben Boyce, and this is the Dr. Junkie Show. Today, I have a conversation with my dad, Steve Boyce, and we cover a lot of ground, from cocaine and marijuana and alcohol to my early life and some of the things that, looking back, I think shaped me in a way that impacted my addiction later on. And we take lots of trips into the weeds of religion and marriage. I actually think I didn't realize what my dad's religion was fully until we had this conversation. Anyway, it's a long talk, so I'll leave you to it. Here's Steve Boyce.
It's kind of early for me, but just opened my first beer.
You're in the big leagues
I'm a
now,
long-time
baby.
listener.
I
know what you do. I'm a long-time listener and follower, obviously, but I just don't know. I don't feel like I've got that much to say, but we'll see if I run out.
I think you'll be surprised. I told you along the way, we should deliberately try to not talk all the way through the stuff we're going to talk about, because it inevitably makes the next time you tell the story, you shorten it because we just talked about it and it comes out different. But I kind of hinted at you that my thought was this is probably a really cool way for listeners who know I was an addicted person who had the run of runs, right? Mainline injecting cocaine, heroin, Xanax for a while, fentanyl for a while, everything, and managed to come out of it. But to talk about how that happened, because genetics is maybe a good thing to throw in here. There is no such thing as a genetic sequence that if you see it in a newborn, they're going to be addicted. But there's a lot of things you could correlate with it. If you're somebody that really loves doing something exciting, whereas some people are just terrified by that. I've told the story before on here that I wanted to bring up today of one of my earliest memories of childhood is being packed. We had 6 people in our family. It was me, you, mom, and then 3 sisters, packed into a Chevy Sprint, which it was like a clown show because I don't even know how you got us all in that little 3-cylinder car.
It was a small car.
But driving down, maybe Butler Road, but a dirt road, and you slowing down a little bit and then pulling the parking brake and spinning it around, and me being that's the coolest thing that's ever happened, and looking around and seeing all 3 of them why did you do that? Never do that again. There's probably something genetic to that. So you and I will notice as we talk, we've got some similarities that are probably, they're clearly genetic that relate directly to our substance use, but it clearly isn't just genetics. There's a lot that goes in. So I'm thinking we can talk through the 80s and 90s and how maybe society deserves a small pat on the back for very small changes as far as how can a parent deal with a kid who's starting to use drugs or struggling with addiction at a young age now that wasn't even a fucking option. What if you and mom would have got together in 1993 and been we should just make a safe spot for him to use marijuana at home and make sure you might get your fucking kids took and you're immediately bad parents.
Well, I didn't have a safe spot to use marijuana at home, so I don't know how I was set up to...
This would have been the 70s, right? Late 70s?
I'm pretty sure. No, not at home. When I was a kid, no. And even after I got married, I probably was introduced to smoking weed at, I don't know, I was either 16 or 17. I was a late bloomer on everything. I was kind of the guy at school. I did okay, but I wasn't the most popular guy or the class pres or, captain of the football team. But I was the guy that, I probably could have been a lot more popular with the ladies if I'd known what to do with them, But back then I was the kind of guy that I know I had girls that had crushes on me and I didn't know what to do with them. And I knew I wasn't really supposed to do anything with them. And I just kind of went by that. So
that's interesting.
I graduated when I was 17 too. So I was kind of one of the youngest kids in my class.
What do you mean you knew you weren't supposed to do anything with them? We're not starting at the beginning, but we'll work our way around to that. But this is something I don't think I would have known because I got the impression that even though you grew up Christian, it was Presbyterian. And we've talked about that. It's kind of the, okay, maybe you're supposed to still be a Christian. So what's the most base model church that's not going to require you to pretend you believe a bunch of nonsense, but they got some of that rich ritual and you sing hymns and you have a potluck once a week. I kind of
Right,
had the
right. We
impression that
didn't.
didn't soak into you as far as the morals of take a vow of chastity until you're married. But is that where that came from?
I don't know that it was even that. I think it was just being naive about growing up things, and like I can remember an example. Girl like me, she called in,
Socially.
and I'm assuming she wants to come over and hang, and she brought. We had a finished basement, so to kind of have some space to ourselves, let's go down and hang in the basement, and the stereo's down there, and maybe it was Walk This Way by, it was an Aerosmith album, maybe. And it
Yeah.
was Walk This Way. And so she was like, here, I brought this record to play. Let's turn on this song. And my mom had already sent my sister to come down and sit at the bottom of the stairs in the basement to quote unquote chaperone us. And she turned on like Walk This Way and wanted to dance. And so we're kind of dancing. And like when it comes to the line like this, just give me a kiss. She started kissing on me. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I'm in my basement. My sister's sitting here. My mom's upstairs. This isn't supposed to be going on. I didn't know what to do with it. Where it's perfect opportunity to send my sister upstairs and do some kissing. But,
Well, this idea of like this built-in shame that nobody really knows where it comes from, but it's almost always related to the really important fucking shit that you know how you don't just give your kids the keys to a car when they're 16, like have at it, you'll figure it out.
right.
Like, just get in there and push the buttons. And it's like so important and dangerous if they don't do it right that they could hurt themselves or other people that you really try to teach them. But it's fucking terrifying as a parent because you're like, I don't want my kid out there in a car. That's exactly how we should feel about all the other shit, but we've been given permission in our society, in most, to be like, you can also just convince yourself your kids will never have sex or do drugs and then make them feel so ashamed of the idea if they did, they would lie to you so you wouldn't have to know the scary truth. And that's like what both of us grew up in and probably never realized it, if at all, until decades later when you look back and realize like somewhere along the way you learned to be ashamed of sex, not because sex is shameful, but because it was a really simple way for adults to prevent you from grinding all over every girl you came across. They got to get you to feel something that disciplines yourself so Sue doesn't have to follow you around 18 hours a day.
I can see that, I guess this is a podcast about drugs, right? So I guess we might as well talk about that. But you're right. When it came to relating to kids, it's, I mean, I'm old now. I was born in 1960 in a small town of Battle Creek, Michigan, which is known for cornflakes and post toasties. And,
Weird psychology
it's
history.
always been there, but it's just funny. Years like Jerry Seinfeld now has made a movie, Unfrosted or something,
Yeah.
about, but I think it was more sanitarium, weird shit, that is his little comedic spin. But yeah, back then, I mean, my parents didn't do any drugs.
Yeah, yeah,
My
they
dad,
did.
my dad
Yeah, they
was a
did.
drinker.
Well,
Well, not as far as,
thought you said you
but
listened to the podcast.
so he had his own drug. Okay, but I'm just saying it wasn't around. And then by the time I was a kid, I was turned on to weed at, 17, 16, somewhere in there from a friend, and who was just a friend, but he was a dealer, because he sold me some once in a while. So that makes him a dealer, right?
Yeah, all drug users are drug dealers, right?
But it was I guess probably the illegal stigma about it, where it's, mostly considered legal now to smoke weed, whether it's medically approved or whether our state, certain areas, you can't drive 2 blocks without there being a dispensary there. And as
Right.
long as you got ID and you're 21 and got cash, you
And
can
the
buy all
world
the
didn't
weed you
fall
want.
apart. How weird, right? All this shame that was built on, like, well, guys, don't you realize? Haven't you seen all the public service announcements? If you smoke weed, you'll deflate into your couch and steal your dog, and you'll be on crack in 2 weeks. That still is repeated in some circles, but it didn't hold up at all. We should think about that with all these other drugs we're still locking people up for and ruining their lives.
the dispensary thing's been a strange transformation for me because, to quote Willie Nelson, back in my day, a dime bag cost a dime. There wasn't anything regulated about it and about the worst thing you looked for because you usually bought weed from somebody that you knew, but it's like your worst enemy was seeds, because they
Because
make a
that's
mess when they
and
try to
that's the war on
burn.
drugs. What's coming in
But
is like the shit they can grow cheap and smuggle in outdoors somewhere, usually in Mexico. So they were just growing shit in the woods and drying it out and crushing it in a hydraulic press. All of it
it
had
was,
seeds.
but even a few years back, and I'm sure some people are still doing it, but it went from the incentive of, what maybe back in the day, like, oh, this is Mexican. It all comes from somewhere else to it kind of seems like to me it turned into an era of growing. Like the
Yeah,
people that I'd get my stuff from, they grew it, their
yeah,
basement, and
right.
they were dealers, let's say, selling it to a number of people and not making a living, but okay, money making hobby. And then the dispensaries started popping up. And at first I was like, I'm not going to a dispensary and paying big, big money when look at all this money I'm saving by dealing with. And that particular person I haven't seen in a number of years because I don't know whether my brain adjusted or whether pricing adjusted,
Yeah,
with
it's
the
like
market,
beer.
but
Right.
dispensaries pricing of stuff really isn't that bad anymore.
Yeah.
At a
Not that
dispensary, which I
bad.
always,
Would you tell me 2, 3 weeks ago, $30 an ounce? Something that I was like, that's not right. You thought it was going to be shit, and then she brought it home, and you were like, what the fuck? It might have
oh
even been
yeah,
less than
and that
that.
is, I do. I think got like two, and it was some special they had plus some pre rolls, and that's been probably 2.5 months ago, and I'm
Yeah,
still working on that.
yeah. When I
It's
was
nice when you can.
16, I got the best hookup for local grown weed, and it was $100 for 7 grams, $400 an ounce. No deal, because I was a 18-year-old kid. That shit is now a hobby. It's just like alcohol. It's funny, we have a mutual friend, let's call him, I don't know, Billy, that occasionally has had access to moonshine. I'm always like, thanks, but like, why? What's the whole purpose of drinking this instead of just going to the spot up the road and knowing I'm not gonna get sick because somebody did it wrong? But it's a hobby now. Like everything that gets capitalized, it's kind of the downside. It's good that
Never
you can
appealed to
anybody
me.
can get it. At least we're not broke if we're addicted to marijuana anymore. It's one less thing to fuck our lives up, but it
The
also
moonshine
changes
thing
it.
just never appealed to me. I don't know if it's the taste or the effect, but I've also never had a big appeal for, let's say, hard liquor. I gotta say, at this point in my life, it's legal. I'm not breaking any laws. I don't think I'm killing myself at this point. I've made it to 64 years old, but my poisons of choice are Bush Light and a little bit of weed. I mean, I smoke a cigarette once in a while, which I know isn't good for me, but I just never got into. We led quite different lives in the drug realm because I dabbled and always felt like, I'm in this special club that we don't know about it. We know about it, me and my smoking peers, but nobody else can know.
Yeah.
Because it's illegal by good, it's certainly don't want a cop to know.
Yeah, it's
But
funny we've run into both sides of that because part of your story growing up, I was like, let's start with my youth, and I'm like, actually, it's kind of better to we're back 20 years before that to or 10 to draw some of the before I was around and where the fuck did the relationship that made me come from? Because my God, it's got to be something weird. There's both sides to this. The laws were like not just, I mean, even in the 90s they were still bad, but in the 60s and 70s we were still coming out of this like you could go to prison for decades for having just a little bit of weed if a cop really wanted to fuck with you. It was big trouble. Whereas by the 90s you might get a cop that throw it out or you get a misdemeanor or some probation. But DUI, the way substances were treated, there was something more of like this leeway in some cops to be able to handle situations that might otherwise stamp your entire fucking life with the stigma of some sort of conviction, and then who knows where you go from there. They're willing to be like, maybe we can do something this time, but you need to like learn a lesson. You had talked about getting pulled over drunk when you were a kid, right? It's
oh
been
yeah,
50 years.
I
I
guess
think you're all right since you feel bad about
it was
it.
in my early years, and I
Yeah.
wasn't a very good drinker yet, so I'd been to let's see, somebody we were graduating with was going into the Marines.
Oh man.
No, bravo. So he threw a party back when maybe they still do, but it was at a bank because they had a basement banquet room.
Huh.
So he threw a party that ended up being a kegger and probably rowdier than what that bank would have liked, but it was kegger, and me and another buddy had put our stereos together and taken 100 records. We were the DJs, and long story short, it was all broke down, and I'm heading home, and I had way too much to drink and was just by myself. I don't know, I might have been 18 by then.
That's what
I,
I would
I
think you
turned
were probably.
18 and I was legal to drink, and that was in October. And then the law changed January 1st to 21. So then I
Such good
had,
taste.
like, I was legal for 2.5 months, and then I wasn't. But oh, anyway, this particular night, it was 1 in the morning. I'm driving home to my dad's house because I was staying there for the weekend because I played the game. I knew that I could stay at my dad's and come home at 1 in the morning, half drunk, and he's not going to make any fuss. And my folks were divorced by then. And my mom lived closer, so I didn't have to drive by my mom's house, but within 2 miles, driving along, and all of a sudden I get lit up, and there's two fine officers in the car. So I got one on each side of me, flashlights. And the reason I pulled you over is that you crossed the center line back there a little ways, and we kind of thought you were going to come over and hit us head on. So are you okay? And told him I was fine, but it was obviously, I probably had empty beer cans in the back seat and shit. And they take me back to their car, and I'm thinking this is one of those things that's going to mess up my whole life. And it seems like without even telling me, one of the cops goes up, one of the fine police officers goes up, gets in
The
my
fine
car.
police officers.
Well, I have to say that at this point because I didn't know them. I don't know if they knew me. I don't know if they knew one of my parents, my stepdad, maybe. I don't know. But one of them goes up, jumps in my car in the driver's seat, starts it up, and does a U turn. And the other one follows in suit. I'm in the back seat, does a U turn. They never even handcuffed me or anything. Drives back down the road that my mom lives on, drives right down and right up in the driveway, parks the car, gets out and says, "Okay, come on." We walk up to the door and they hand my keys to my mom. Say, "Here's your son." And I got the lecture and the look and that. But those guys should have taken me to jail and
Oh,
towed my car. I mean, nowadays
arguably, yeah.
there's like so little tolerance for that, which is probably right because I know I was a hazard on the road, but that's probably the biggest break I've ever got in
Well,
my life at an early age.
when I went to jail for the first time, it was like devastating, not just because I was in jail, but because I was like, I've been raised to know that this means something. And what it means is not to be taken, and exactly how you said it, I just fucked my life up, right? And that heavy weight actually, I'm with you that like the law's got to be applied equally, but why this particular story strikes me as interesting is like, I wish I could go back and see how the scenario played out if it went the other way, because I was arrested at 15 at school for smoking weed and I didn't get away. And that set me on a course where from the age of 15 on, it was like a light switch flipped from the police are just people. They're good guys. They're who you call if you're in a struggle. You're probably never even going to talk to them, but your uncle is a cop, so you know they're fine. To the police are your fucking enemy and they will ruin your fucking life and make you miserable and tell everybody you're a junkie and kick you out of school. And that led to me being like, well, then fuck the police and the law's shit too, and just sort of not having a lot of respect. It makes me wonder, there's no way to tell, but where your life might have gone if you hadn't got that break. And then if you also didn't have.
I was young, so I guess I didn't have the "it's ruining my life" thing, but I had like, oh, I'm in big trouble. Like I'm about to lose my license, which I just got last year. I'm a newer
Yeah,
driver still, although I was a good driver. I was the best. I could have been in NASCAR.
me
That's what
too.
we all think, right?
We'll
Yeah.
get to some of that too.
But I just felt like, wow, I'm not going to lose my license or my car or have fines and court dates. But my mom sure is going to be pissed off at me.
Right. Well,
But
and your mom was
that made
somebody
her a
that
good mom.
I don't know what the right word for Luella was. My grandma and your mom, because she died a few years ago. I mean, that isn't why I don't know the right word for her, but like dignified or carried herself with a lot of composure. Sometimes, like not at all how I act, but I've said to you before, you have way more what I would call class than I do because I don't even try. I don't wear jewelry. I don't dress up. I'm in a hoodie and jeans every time you see me.
I didn't feel any less loved. I just felt, I can almost hear, what a disappointment, Stephen. She's probably the only one in my life that's called me Stephen, and normally it was with a tone.
Well, then you met
Yeah,
this. Yeah, then you met Diane, my mom. You're the other side of this really weird dialectic. That's a nerd word for like yin yang. This two face, if you will. This one thing that was a marriage that, from the outside looking in, people that meet you and then meet her are like, what the fuck? My mom is a hardcore evangelical Trump support and thinks prophecy is real, thinks miraculous hearings are real, like the sort of evangelical Christian that tries to fully embrace some radical version of Christianity whereby God bestows power and the end times are around the corner and we're all going to die if we don't repent stuff. I don't know if I've ever asked you if you're atheist, but you're about as close as how would you identify yourself if somebody asks?
a Presbyterian.
What the hell does that mean?
I don't want to offend any Presbyterians,
What,
but
no, I mean, what's it mean to you? Okay.
I would say the Presbyterian Church is probably a church that your mother, God bless her, would never go to because they're not deep enough and it doesn't mean enough. And like when I was growing up, my mother never carried her Bible around with her, didn't stop people on the streets to explain Jesus to them. But we went to church every week to
Yeah,
either
but
sit through a Sunday school lesson,
when do you go now?
get some
How often?
encouraging word. Um,
I didn't ask what you were when you were a
got
kid.
married in a chapel.
I said, what are, yeah, chapel in Vegas does not count. No, but like, what I'm asking is right now, here, let me try this a different way. I'm surprised at this one because we talk about it so much. You got to just about be tired of me bringing up atheism. And do you think people come back from the dead sometimes?
Let's say no.
Oh, let's say no. Let's try another one. Do you think that the almighty creator of the universe sometimes has to send himself to be sacrificed to himself to serve as a loophole for the rules he made and can change any tide he wants to save us from going to this place he made for us called hell that we'll go to if we're too stupid to believe in him?
Isn't this a podcast about drugs?
It is. I'm just trying to get a pace. So the reason, okay, I don't think I realized you still kind of called yourself Presbyterian. It's still a clash, even if the clash is between like you're the however you just described it, nice calm rituals, sing some hymns, but don't shove your Bible down anyone's
Oh, I'm
throat.
I'm not a card carrying Presbyterian. I guess that's just the only thing I have to relate to because that's what I grew up with. And do I go to church anymore? No.
Right, because it's not
But
real. Not to drag us off
I
religion,
probably
but
still
that.
didn't answer your question.
Well, no, I didn't quite. I think it's good that we hit that first because it changes the question. But still, like, yeah, tell us about you and Diane and where I came from.
We met somewhere and we started hanging out somehow. And we had similar, I had some church upbringing, so I guess that got me in the door.
Yeah. No, that helped me
but
understand that a lot more, actually.
her family was always a little more stout on things than that. But we met and fell in love and planned a wedding date, and then we ended up bumping up the wedding date. And to the rest of the world out there, you were like a miraculous birth because you were born in 7 months.
Yeah, I did the math, 6 months ago or so ago. I was thinking, it was like, hey, you guys got pregnant months before you got married, which puts it back into like December. And what was your answer?
Merry Christmas.
No, that's not
I
what you
don't
said.
know.
You said Merry fucking Christmas.
It was a time of turmoil when
But you guys
you
were in
know,
love too, right?
yeah,
That's what I
yeah.
remember.
It was
Even
young
from,
love. Well, I mean, you got to realize though, and I don't know what the average person does, but I think she was still 19. I was 20 when we got married. And you have 4 kids the first 8 years of your marriage.
right.
And you stay married for 23 years. And
When people get married too, but when people get pregnant, they often, like, you kind of have to have a lifestyle change. You have to watch a lot of people like eat different. You can't consume drugs or alcohol. And for a lot of folks, that forces them to sort of develop some tools to get through what the rest of us can just go smoke a joint and handle a little better if they're the sort of people that do drugs. But that was about the time in her life where she went from whatever the term normal partier, it's not like she ever was an addicted person or anything, but she didn't seem to have a huge moral dilemma with occasional recreational alcohol consumption and maybe a joint here or
True,
there.
hanging out on a Friday night or Saturday
Yeah.
night and
But nothing after
partying a
that
little
or
bit with somebody, a little bit of weed, drinking some wines, whatever. I don't know, but yeah, it was a changing time in my life because there were obviously her folks had opinions
boy howdy.
that I'd done something wrong, and my mom was the first one. God bless her, but was the first one to ask about abortion.
Yeah, which I
That
always
was
appreciate.
promptly, I was like, I don't know, and it was promptly turned down by your mom, and
It's funny that when I heard mom tell me that story repeatedly, even growing up when I was still a Christian, my first reaction was like, I wouldn't care. Even if our religious ideology is true and I'm in heaven looking down, I wouldn't give a shit, right? But
you
chances
wouldn't
are,
know, as far
chances
as I'm
are,
concerned.
right, and chances are I'd never have existed at all anyway, and I still wouldn't care. And it's one of many things your side of the family and your mom specifically gave me an example or a way to think about things that there's no fucking way I would have been offered from what was normally going on in my life. And the evangelical heavy church abortion is murder, to hear that your grandma was like, that might be the right thing to do. Like, I'm not only not offended, I think she was right. It was it was at the time, it doesn't look like you guys were quite where you thought you were. And that's a lot to dump on a new relationship. Make sure you really want this without a kid.
I mean, yeah, I can say now, maybe not all the time, because obviously we haven't been married for 50 years now. It ended at 23, but that's a pretty good run for a marriage,
Yeah.
for somebody getting married that young. And I kind of felt like it inverted my life a little bit. Like I grew up, and even as immature as anybody is at 20, you think you got the world figured out, but a lot of my friends weren't married. And that changes your relationship with your guy friends real quick when they got no wife and kids and they want to do something. And you're like, got to work all day. And then I'm going home, like dinner's at 5:30. What?
Yeah.
But I kind of felt, I don't know, like maybe I could have gone a different way because it settled me down in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to say for the most part, my normal life, probably a little weed, even back then when I got married, a little weed, few beers,
Yeah.
were enough input to, settle my brain down and, whether
Right,
it's calm my
you weren't getting
anxiety
up
or
at 10 a.m. and putting down half a pint just so you could crawl out of bed and
I never wanted to be this guy. I had a neighbor that was, I think, the lead mechanic at a repair shop, and he bragged. He'd drink a 40-ounce bottle of beer on his way to work at 7:30 in the morning. He'd get out for lunch at noon. He'd go drink another 40-ounce bottle of beer for his lunch. He'd go back to work, head mechanic at a Midas or something, whatever it was way back in the day. And he'd stop and get another 40 ouncer on his way home at 4:30 at night. I don't want to do that. If I get up and don't eat breakfast and drink a 40 ouncer of beer, my morning's pretty much shot as far as being
see that.
sharp and
Yeah,
crisp. And
that's
I
it,
don't,
right.
I've
The
been
first two
diminished.
hours, though, the first 2 hours are going to be fucking great, right? Hour and a
They're
half.
going to be fun until you're
Yeah,
responsible
right.
legally for somebody's brakes going out on a car that they
Yeah.
paid good money to be fixed, and you're
And you just feel like shit. You listen to the podcast all the time. That's part of what it's about is like, it's not an all or nothing game. There's something to be said about moderation, which we're headed directly at. That's a word that'll
yeah, which I
come up
feel
soon.
like I've always had some, but it's quite honestly with age, I drink less, maybe because I know it takes my body longer to recover, and
Yeah.
I don't enjoy a hangover feeling the next day, and I've always valued my sleep. I don't like to drink to where it interferes with that. And, but even the way things have gotten lately, I'm probably like a lot of people. It seems like I'm getting less and less social, like
Yeah.
since the pandemic, and just went to the doctor's office the other day. I think you'd said it. And I'm like, no, I don't notice it that much. But walked in, sat down. There's four people in there. I'm one of them. The other three are on looking at their phones.
Hmm.
staring at their phones. They're looking at
Always.
TikTok, Facebook, texting somebody. Instead of just sitting in a waiting room waiting, you've got
Yeah.
to entertain yourself with your phone. And I'm starting to fall into that too. I don't think I'm
Yeah.
addicted to it, but
They're good tech. Like they're literally designed to get us to stare at them, and then we're surprised when we want to stare at them. Like we kind of asked for it, and we're also surprised. Like I'm reading a book right now, so I'll drag some of it in. But like what they're doing is avoiding experience. They're slowly but surely. You and I talked about how the lines at Disneyland have changed, and there's no long. There used to be lines that sucked, and you had to wait for an hour, and they'd say 1 hour, 12 minutes. So you didn't kill anybody when you got in line. You knew how long, and then it turned into like different rooms with screens on the wall that you kind of got absorbed. And then you could buy a fast pass, and now you can schedule to get on the ride and walk up to the front and literally ding, your timer clicks and you get on. All that time that you would have otherwise spent in reflection. What do you do in a waiting room when you don't have tech? People don't remember, but you think, man, what he said about Trump, I know Trump is the best president ever and he doesn't lie, but man, what my friend said earlier, man, I gotta double check. When I get home, I'm gonna look that up. But I wonder if he's not always. We wonder why we're in such polarized worlds where nobody seems to be able to change their fucking mind about anything. And I think that's a big part of it. Is when would they change their mind? There's an old quote that I use with my students a lot from like the '60s, where I want to say it's Benjamin or Walter Benjamin. There's a nerd thing to slide in here. Nobody's ever heard of that dude, but said that even when we're going to sleep, media and television has this ability to slide a few final messages beneath the portals of sleep. That like we get in bed and we usually turn off the TV in the living room, and most of us turn on the one in the bedroom, and we literally fall asleep.
I've never been that way.
Yeah,
I've never been that. I don't want that noise and light
right.
when I'm trying to go to sleep.
And then first thing in the morning, most people are like either right back at it, but we just don't realize what we've lost with that. I don't know what that has to do with what we're talking about, but I talk about it all the time on this show. Okay, so I'm born. Tell us about Ben as a kid.
You were still asking about getting married,
Oh yeah,
weren't you?
yeah,
Because I
yeah,
did want to say that it was good times, and like I said, I felt like it kind of inverted my life in a good way. It made me hunker down and know I got business to take care of. I got to take
yeah,
care of my family, because your job as a parent is to keep your kids alive, feed them, and love them.
yeah,
And everything else is just kind of, it's not always doing everything right because nobody does. But I think a lot of times it's comes down to, as far as success or failure. Oh, and I want to say this, the bad things that you don't do are what can make you successful.
yeah,
Everybody's going to make mistakes, but there are lines, that are pretty obviously, if we made points of them, that you just failed as a parent, dude.
yeah.
That's a failure there. That's not just a slip or a
In a
mistake.
million
But
ways for people to avoid accountability. You know what I was gonna say? The one easiest guide of a parent is how many fingers does your kid have when they're grown? We'll get to that. That joke will make sense in a few.
yeah, you still got most of yours. But anyway, mine was inverted. There were times it was frustrating. Every marriage is, but we did grow differently in it. Once your mom became pregnant and she's got an embryo in her and it's you and it's growing and being nurtured and that, alcohol and weed aren't good, supposedly, for a
Right,
fetus. Okay.
right.
I didn't have any reason to stop, but she did. And she took it very seriously, which I admire. And it just seemed like from that point, it brought her closer to God.
Yeah, right,
Maybe it's a
right.
good way to say it.
I
And
mean, fine. You can say
she
it
she
that
never
way.
went back to it. So to me, it was like, well, we used to be one way, and I don't think I really changed, but I think you just did in ways I could admire,
Hmm.
but I'm just not like there with you. Made the best of it for 23 years, and there were good times and bad times, but I love all my kids. And again, with the inverted thing, I'm glad, I had my kids younger. I know people that are 60 now with 20-year-olds, and that's kind of a harder bridge to gap,
Yeah,
as far as communication. But,
as far as keeping up with them, shit.
because I wasn't even big into dating or tons of girls, and, and so like getting married was woohoo. And then once I got divorced, I guess I felt like I still had it going on. And, that's when I had the choice to get out there and hang with different people and do what I wanted because kids were growing up and, not the wifey thing anymore. And went through different phases that I probably could have done between 20 and 30, but I was married. So I wasn't doing all those, you want to say crazy things, but I probably had more of my heyday. Oh, yeah, in my 40s after the divorce.
Yeah, once we were all grown. We'll get to that too, I think. We're going to come back around to that. Part of it's going to be where we lived because one of my first memories isn't just the sprint, but it's like being on a dirt road that was where our house was at, and you put me on a four-wheeler and taking me out to the gravel pit and then flipping the four-wheeler over and just about ripping your hand off and having to, like, the vivid memory is you trying to steer the four-wheeler and use the throttle with your wrong hand because your other one was so mangled you couldn't use it, and how anybody that's ever rode a bike and made the mistake of trying to switch your hands, you're crashing. Like, everything's backwards that way. But what was I like to you growing up, little Ben?
Oh, you were just the cutest little thing. You were a little mini me, and you made me proud most of the time. It's funny
Most of
too,
the
because
time.
like looking back at pictures that, there's certain pictures that we obviously look different now, because of our age difference. But like pictures of you when you were two and pictures of me when I was two, pretty darn similar,
Huh.
So I knew you were mine.
Yeah, the DNA tests weren't very easy to do back then. Good thing. I look back on my youth and I see shades of like previews of an addiction problem, but only in hindsight because that's how it usually works. Is you're like, well, yeah, this, and this kind of point to that. But what was it like with a kid that like liked to set the house on fire and take guns outside that he didn't know how they worked and get ammo from the neighbor and figure out how to shoot them? And I don't think you ever caught me doing that one. And
You did
always
some
getting into
interesting
something.
things, but it seems like you kind of, I don't want to say you're an extremist, but like you take things a little farther, like the propane tank fiasco. I could see me as a kid maybe going up and turning it on and going, oh, that's so cool. Taking a match to it, I don't think I'd have done that. But just a
No, I
quick
didn't
story.
know. I know
I don't.
looking
Yeah,
back, if
we
I would have realized that. So, what he's talking about is we lived in the country. It was a dead end dirt road, like a mile long, and every house at the end for a while was all our family. So, it was kind of a cool place to be able to ride bikes and four wheelers and be left alone. But you had to have your own propane. They weren't piping it in. And we had one old tank that at one point had to be replaced. And we thought it was empty because the furnace wasn't running off it anymore, but there was still a good deal in it. So I went on and when they weren't home was turning on the valve and then lighting the cutoff pipe about 6 inches from the, I don't know, 1,000 gallon propane tank.
from the valve. Yeah,
Yeah.
we'd either switched companies or something, and they had come and moved the old tank, but hadn't taken it away yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wasn't home that day, but I got that. That was one of those
Just wonder what would
stories
make me
that
even, that's it, because that was young. I remember that being 10 or younger, maybe even younger than 10. But by that
you were a
point, I had already,
firebug.
well, I know, but how the fuck did I just try to light everything? Ooh, look, air coming out of there that smells funny. Try to light it on fire. And how did I keep getting a hold of fire? I wish I remembered
Those
more.
lighters I left around, probably. I don't
Maybe.
know. Well, it was matches back in the day, and we did have a wood stove, so we had to have some kind of fire
That's
source
fair.
around.
So I probably just kept pilfering them slowly but surely. And then with like three kids below me and me being a boy and being rather like, I got this, get out of the way. I imagine I had a bit more the middle of the country as opposed to living in the city. Like I could get on my bike when I was 12 and just about disappear. So I'm sure
I
that
would
was
have
a lot
thought
of it
that
too.
as a kid, because I didn't grow up that isolated, but that would be fun to grow up that way,
Yeah,
where we could
it
ride the
was.
quads and dirt bikes and go karts and stuff up and down the street. And nobody, our dog, for God's sake, for 10 years was an outdoor dog with no
Yep.
fenced yard. And we're just out in the country. And you know what? She didn't bother anybody and nobody cared.
Yeah, which is weird as close to we were probably 15 minutes from Battle Creek. We weren't that far away, but only dirt road in the area. So I'm the sort of kid that like lights stuff on fire, likes to go fast, has a bicycle. At one point, I chopped the tip of my finger off with a lawnmower and kind of ruined the rest of my summer because I was just like, get out of the way, I'm gonna blaze a bike trail through the middle of the tundra, and I tried to adjust the mower up. But so just a kid that was like not fully thinking through a lot of stuff and sometimes getting in trouble. Glad the house didn't burn down a couple times. Drugs in moderation. You hinted at this when you were telling the story about a creek that you just kind of carried on what I would call relatively light regular drug use. Smoked a little weed here and there, drank beer when you got off work at home. Lived in the middle of the country with two good old boys for a square mile in any direction. What was it like? It's worth like asking this question. What was it like by that point living with what I think all of us kids view it this way too, is like a schism or a break or a gap between we would go to church on Sunday and kind of be told that people like my dad go to hell. And then we would come home or get picked up at church sometimes by my dad, and I'd be like, I don't know, buddy. Seems like something ain't quite right here. And also on your side, that like, why aren't you here with us? Clearly, you're feeling compelled by the relationship to not say, hey, kids, you're being fed a line of shit, but also you're not willing to go engage in this shit for whatever reason. You got better things to do with your time, and you're not trying to hear the nonsense they were peddling there. Like, that lasted for a long time, almost 23 years. What was that like?
Well, I was into it enough. I mean, there were times I drove the church bus
Yeah.
for a church that we went to in Bellevue,
But that wasn't
and
the cuckoo church yet, right? Back then it was
no,
mostly.
not quite. And I guess, I don't know, maybe that was just my way of expressing without knowing I was expressing a feeling, but that it wasn't as important to me. It
Yeah.
just didn't mean that much. Like, oh, I'd go now and then, but it was more the Presbyterian thing. Like,
Yeah,
I
but were
might go on
you
Sunday for an hour, but I don't
exactly?
need Wednesday nights and
Even on Sunday,
Thursday.
though, were you there when people were speaking in tongues? Have you ever spoken tongues? Don't lie, I have. I could do it right now. I've done it on the
I
podcast.
have, and I could do it right now
Wow,
too, but
Handela Sheba,
not
good for you.
not the real feeling. No,
Right.
that was the stuff that made me uncomfortable.
That's
Probably like somebody with really bad BO that you're behind at the grocery store.
right.
You just as soon not
Well done.
be there in that place at that particular time. And I guess it doesn't bother me if you do it, but I don't necessarily need to see it. I've never thought that it was bad to have a little church in you because they've got good points, but
No,
it's
they
that's about
don't.
as extreme as I am. I'm
Is
not.
there, have you ever thought of anything that you get from church that you can't get without church?
Well, at this point in my life, I do without it. So
Well, I
it's
know, but is there something you're missing purely because you're not going to church and you couldn't get it anywhere else? So you have to put up with blatant lies, people who lie for a living, teaching kids that when they hurt somebody, the best thing to do is not apologize and make amends to the person they hurt, but to Jesus. That blood sacrifice and human sacrifice are acceptable, that women are property, that occasionally
yeah.
enslaving
I don't
folks is.
I don't buy into all that.
Well, I
But
know you don't, but is there something that if I just put up with all that rotten shit I just listed, that at least I'll get this and you can't get this anywhere else? Like, why bother with the fucking pile of slavery, racism, misogynistic bullshit if you can get everything that's in that pile of bullshit from the not bullshit store next door, the potpourri
I
store
guess
next door?
I've never been one that went 100% into God, but once you do, if God be for you, who can be against you? God's always right.
Yeah, I got out of it
So
though.
you've got that's the only thing you got to fall back on.
It's funny, I'd
And
give you credit for part of my getting out of that because in prison, especially, I was super. It's the only drug on that you can get there that's not expensive and you can't get in trouble for is religion. And I knew the Bible from my JBQ days and
oh
church, but
sure,
I was really religious when I got out. And looking back, I would say your example. It's funny that you're still like, well, I think I'm Presbyterianish because I'm like, I would have, before this conversation, I think I would have told people you were an atheist, but probably had never used that word because it meant something different to you. Or even, 40 years ago, if you would have said it to your mom, it would have meant you were saying like you worship the devil or something. I don't think she would have known what it even means.
maybe that's the line my brain doesn't want to cross. Like yeah, I'm going to hell, and I admit it.
No, no,
But
no. Atheist, a means not.
there
So
is no hell, right?
is it just means that? So do you believe Zeus exists?
Let's
Okay.
say
Do
no.
you think the spaghetti monster
Let's
exists?
say no.
Okay, no.
No,
You are atheist when it comes to Zeus. How about Allah?
not a big follower.
Okay, so he's probably not real. So my point is you would just be a theist. Those are all deities, theist things. And you and I don't believe either any of those motherfuckers exist. So if you want to say like, well, Jesus maybe, I might believe in him, but the rest, phew, Well, then we agree on like you're 98% atheist and I'm 100% atheist. Little side note. Anyway,
Okay, you
yeah,
can
I think
label
it.
me however you want. You're my
No,
son. I'm not
I
offended.
think it didn't mean to, it always meant that, but I think publicly, because so many people have left the church in the last 10 years based largely on this shitty example they're setting right now, and how, not all of them, because there's still a lot of Christians that are trying, but how much the anti-truth, take power above all else movement seems to have been largely co-opted by a lot of religious groups that we would think wouldn't have anything to do with that. I think that's why the
50%,
word means something different now than it
I
did.
think 50% of the country's kind of on that kick right now, but it's not Jesus.
Anything else? Well, we're off topic. My point was,
I know. What happened to drugs?
I wanted to ask what was it like to live in that, because part of the religious difference, which apparently wasn't quite as much as I thought, was also a drug difference that I can't imagine what it would be like when I was raising my kids to be like, oh, I'm going to go out in the garage and work on something because I just felt like I need to step away and hit my weed pipe a few times so I can sleep good tonight, or just because I want to. And I'm like, oh, I have to lie to everybody and then cut, like the people that smoke with rubber gloves on in the trunk and then spray chlorine and hide
Right,
everything. Like,
right.
I can imagine.
Nobody's gonna know.
I've lived like that, but like to live like that long. And what's funny is looking back, I knew by the time I was probably, I don't know, eighth or ninth grade that you smoked weed and smoked cigarettes and drank beer. I don't think I knew about anything else till later, but I mentioned this to you
Well, there
yesterday that
wasn't a whole lot other than that going on at that point in my life.
and one of my sisters, we went and visited, you and I together went and visited her 10 years ago, and we went out to smoke weed. And when we came in, it was funny. She said, that's what that smell is? Like she had smelled it growing up too. My point is, I knew that you used drugs along the way, and it oddly did this thing to me that I think should be more common with young people. It never made me want to, but it destigmatized them to the point where I knew if I ever have a friend that's smoking weed, it doesn't mean he's going to be like brain dead or dead, because my dad's the coolest guy. Everybody's dad is, but my dad is the coolest guy in the world. And he smokes weed and he's pretty fucking smart. So fuck you, right? Like he can do a wheelie. That changed in me in a way I think a lot of my friends who were in church and had parents that would outright lie or didn't use drugs at all, they still are under the impression to this day, some of them, that drug use at all is some sort of deadly dangerous thing that does damage to you and other people. That stigma was gone for me, but then what couldn't come with that is what should come with that. Just like when I got ready to drive a car, you took me to a parking lot in a snowstorm and said, fucking have at it, I'm gonna hold on. And we did some donut or controlled donuts, and like this is how you get a hold of a car. That's really important. I don't know if you ever thought about it, but like nowadays it would be an option with a 15, 16-year old who you caught smoking weed, one, two, three, four, right out, leaning against the school building because he was desperate right before class started and getting caught smoking weed, to say, not stop it or else, but rather like, come in, let's talk. Why are you smoking it? How do we make it safe for you? What should we be doing in addition to just smoking weed to treat whatever you're using it for? Is this something that's improving your quality of life or not? There was no way that I see for you guys to have been allies. There's no question there, but like, comment.
And I guess on my side too, even though anybody familiar with the movie Half Baked has one scene where the son's in one room smoking weed and the dad's in the other room smoking weed and grandma's in the third room because it helps my glaucoma. It
Kid's
was,
doing it because he's mad at it because he hates his dad. The dad's doing it because he just can't figure out how to connect with his kid, and the grandma's doing it for glaucoma, which is to
yeah,
suggest that the dad. This is why I mentioned it in passing with your parents. You did grow up with drug use. It was drug use that was rather sanctioned by the state, so it felt different. But your parents were always regular drinkers. Like when we'd go up north on vacation with them, they'd all have drinks from like 11 in the morning for the rest of the fucking day, walking around with like fancy glassware is my memory, but
yeah, it's
they
true.
didn't have problems. They knew how
They
to
were like
moderate it.
sophisticated drinkers. Yeah,
But I
it
think they
was,
taught you that. I think that you saw them. I don't know if you ever heard one of them say, "Well, I don't think I should drive. I've had a couple drinks." Or, but you saw them drinking not way too much and falling down, controlling things, drinking at certain times of the day and not before activities. And then you, after the divorce, you had your dad's partner for a while that was drinking way too much, and so you had like two examples at the same time. But I don't know if you look at it this way, but you probably learned moderation by watching a good example of using a drug and not letting it get out of control, and a very fucking bad example. Do not do that one. If you want to use alcohol, do that one. And that's what I feel like was missing for me growing up is marijuana just happened to medicate me really well. It calmed me down. It made school a little more tended to medicate to some degree, but there was no way for you guys to do anything except bad boy. Don't use that or you're evil, which is ironic because you were the dad in the next room over smoking weed.
Well, it's just different. I mean, it's nowadays I don't feel that uncomfortable in my own home and in my own living room, having a small tray, maybe sitting out here on the coffee table with a little shake and my pipe on it and stuff. And I don't know if anybody out there, I'm sure there's nobody out there my age listening to this, but if you can relate to the days when you kind of had to keep it a secret. Like I had, oh, this is going way back. I don't know if they still sell them or not, but they were first aid kits in a plastic box that were designed to be carried in your car. So you had some gauze and some
Hmm.
tape and band-aids and some antibiotic and stuff in it, nothing major, but I think one of my friends might have even given me the box, but for 15 years I carried that around with whatever weed or weed paraphernalia I had under the driver's seat of my car. I didn't bring weed in the house. Barely allowed to keep beer in
Which
the
is
fridge.
why I could actually find the weed. There's some more irony in that, right? Anytime a substance is stigmatized, shamed, and you got to kind of lie about it, it makes these problems that you otherwise wouldn't have. Because if we would have just known about it, I wouldn't have gave a shit. If I would have found it, I would have been like, "Oh, that's just his weed." Like he's already told us, Dad uses this when you're an adult. It's just like beer. You get to make a decision, but not when you're a kid because it could stunt your development or some simple way to say it. I guess that's what strikes me is that actually is that's how I raised my kids. So my son is 25 now, about a year from his PH fucking D in mathematics. Still a heavy smoker. He's weed. He loves weed, but he started smoking when he was like 15 or 16. And Aaron and I had my wife had already talked about it, and we had said like the one thing we both had issues with is our parents seeming to not know what to do except shame and stigma, which society, like that's what you're taught by society. Stop it or they're going to
Sure.
catch you. And we took the whole opposite approach and we're way ahead of time had told him if you ever wanted to do any drug, alcohol, weed, any drug, acid, just here's our deal. We're fine with that. We'll even let you do it here so you're safe, but come talk to us first and let's make sure we're on the same page. And so they did with weed, and that was kind of our rule is like, don't drive when you're high and use it at home before and after school. But being an ally, this sort of shit you could have told me, but you were in a position where like, now you're going to jail because you're telling your kid how to smoke weed at school. And by the way, you're getting divorced because your wife's going to be like, you told him what? Right?
Well,
Like,
it's kind of, I don't know, maybe I relate it to like the gun laws now where, and yeah, back in the day, like if I'd given you weed and you got busted with it, you told them I got it from my dad, I could be just like these people that are letting their kids get a hold of their guns,
yeah.
and guess who's getting charged? The parents
Yeah.
are too. So
Well,
there
and I
was
don't
a,
think you had any sort of, you've heard me yak addiction shit for going on 10 years now, and a lot of that's sunk in, and I'm sure you've had to be like, oh, things that you didn't think about until, like, it's a good question. Is there things you thought you'd do different if you could go back? It's a
well,
real
sure, but
different.
that's about impossible. I mean, you're talking
Well, I'm thinking for people listening that
things
might
were just so
have
much
kids.
different. For nowadays, it's,
Yeah.
I don't know if I can even relate because everything's so internet and I mean, shit, back in when you were a kid, we still had three TV channels. It was
You had
ABC,
to change them
NBC,
by
and
hand.
Fox or something, right? And get a hold of somebody, you had to call a landline. And if they weren't home, you left a message on their answering machine and they might call you back. There weren't any emojis,
Yep.
it's just everything that's people are
Yeah.
so used to now. It's you can find out anything by just asking Alexa. I don't know if my folks were dumb kids when they got married because I think my mom was 28 when they got married and they waited. Yeah, she was 28 when she had me. So they waited a while. Like they were married
Yeah.
7, 8 years before they had. So they had time to, get their careers going and stuff. But it was all different too because it's like, back then, at least me buckling down and growing up was getting a job and keeping it, being responsible. And it's not
Yeah.
necessarily the way people have to do it anymore.
Some of
It's,
them, but I mean, this has been a kind of a central piece of what we keep hitting on today too, is that disciplining people and punishing people and realigning people with like their best intentions or their best selves or what's best for them in society in the long run. It's not like it's free will, right? We had talked yesterday about someone else in my secondary family that's like an in-law that's struggling with their kid getting ready to go to prison, and how the attitude of both the kid, which is a reflection of what they've been told their whole life, and the parent is like, he'll be all right. He's young and he'll be out in about 5 to 8 years. Talk to him then. And how none of them chose that. Like, they didn't choose to feel that way about jail. It's the result of all the experiences they've had. But the fact that you can change how people think about stuff, not by beating them with a stick but it always comes down to the same thing. Like, what experiences have you had that shaped you that way? And then how does your brain respond to whatever's going on differently than the guy that's sitting next to you? Which brings me to the last question, because now we've walked all the way through. I'm a kid, I grow up, eventually I start to get addicted to stuff. I move out of the house and I'm gone, but I get really bad into heroin addiction. I go to prison,
yeah,
and
you went crazy.
you got to live it up, man. I was a rock star. Anyway, went to went to prison because of it, and then I get out, and like during I don't know, it was probably the first year of my release. I was drug tested every day, but this is one of the times in my life I really remember you sort of stepping up and you give me rides places. For a while, I stayed with you, helped me get a truck that's why my face is all scarred now, because I drove myself through the windshield of it with my own DUI that I didn't get off the hook for. Ended up going back to prison for. But shortly after getting out, it's the holidays. I got no license. I'm getting drug tested every 5 seconds. I can't even have a beer. It's so awful, right? And I get in your truck. You're taking me to visit some of our family for a holiday. And on the way there, this is the era of CDs. And I was like, I'll put some music in. So I reach in the CDs and I pull out a case that's got this white, sticky, gooey, the good shit powder on it. And I smell like the iodine right away. And I'm like, it's cocaine. And we're, 10 minutes from our family. And you're like, oh, and you take it and you scrape it into a line while you're driving and it disappears. And this is one of the times in my life, we've hit a few of these today. Some of the things your mom said to me that made me go, oh, I see things differently now. Where I realized we're all wired differently. If I had done that same dose of cocaine on the way to that lunch, I wouldn't have ate anything. I would have been there 5 minutes before I was like digging through their medicine cabinet and calling people so I could get another 8 ball. And so you do it, and I'm like, uh-oh. And then we went there and you ate, you were social, you weren't jonesing. It was just a nice, and you only did one line. Sounds weird, but like that was another really cool life lesson to realize, like right in front of me is a very similar genetic structure that's just, you've had such different experiences that it didn't treat you the same way as me. This was 20 years ago, I think.
Not,
Yeah,
not like
20.
I've ever talked about it much, and but I mean, I guess I told you getting married young kind of felt like it kept me a little more in line, and then yeah,
20
you're
years
talking
ago.
after I was divorced.
Yeah, you were probably,
We were
I think it
divorced,
was
so
18 years ago, so right before I got married.
and
Yeah.
I had, I mean, I don't know if this goes along with it or not, though, but I had a girlfriend for a number of years who was really into that. And
Hard in
my
the
my
game,
only
yeah.
exposure to it before me, I'm talking about things that I don't think I've ever talked about before. And there's probably some people that are going to hate me now. But you mentioned, yeah, I mean, like cocaine has no draw to me anymore. I don't think it ever will.
Aaron still loves
It
it. My wife
sure
still
did for a
loves it.
while. Well, and I'm not saying that once in a while, if I got together with some people in the right environment and it was we're going to stay up and go talk about old times and stuff,
Yeah.
that I might not. But my first exposure to it was very light. But I had a friend that we might go Christmas shopping once a year, a
Yeah.
guy. We go Christmas shopping for our wives, and 3 or 4 hour chunk. It only surprised me one year and was like, hey, want to see what I got? Want to try some? Okay. And then I don't know, it became a yearly thing for, I'm going to say 4 or 5 years. And we just go out and we do a couple lines, go get a couple drinks, go do some Christmas shopping, maybe get the Christmas shopping out of the way first. But it never really was a draw to me. It's like he was the only friend I'd do it with. And then I had this girlfriend who I didn't know was into it until a couple weeks in. It was one of those experiences where I think she liked to share the experience like you always kind of did when you were younger. Like, I'm going to
Yeah.
turn everybody onto this. So
Yep.
just sitting around one day and it's like, here, we got this stuff, Steve. You want to do a bump? And they like blew my fucking head off. And,
Well, you guys
but
do
then
this more often than I realized.
because like I just wasn't used to it, it'd be
Yeah.
like drinking 6 beers if you're not a drinker. And
Right.
she was just so into it. And it was just right there that I probably did it on a regular, semi-regular basis for like 4 years. And I think that was in that period of time. It just surprises me that I'd be casual enough about it to like leave a bunch of residue of a line on a CD case in my car in the console where my proof of insurance probably was at too, which
At least
might
you
have to
cleaned it
grab
up when you
for.
found it. As soon as you saw it, you're like, "Oh, we got to get rid of that, son."
Maybe that's why. Maybe I was showing off to you. I don't know. Anyway, it's just, I guess I've always felt fortunate that, I had my share of nights staying up till 5 in the morning and not being able to function the next day or having to get up and do a bump to function the next
Yeah.
day. And I can't really explain it, but it's like when I walked away from her, I walked away from it too. I thought, oh, I'm going to be crawling back. I don't know anybody else to get any from. I'm going to be crawling back to her in a week and begging, and at least sell me some or something. But I
Yeah.
never. My poisons are pretty minor.
Yeah,
I
another thing we have in common is that once I figured out what my recipe is, so to speak, another reason that it's really easy for me to understand that free will is not real. This is all pure luck. We both tend to do a good time with alcohol, do well with it. We have physical
You count
response
beer?
that
Does that mean beers
mostly
too?
well, yeah, but I think that's actually because we have, and we're both like cheap beer people. We're lots of water, Bush Light, but we have a reaction that physiologically we get more of a bang for our buck than other people. So we don't have to hammer down a bunch of booze and then have the negative effects catch up to us at the same time. We're not those guys, we both know that when they have one beer they have to have 50 and they're stumbling into the wall, or maybe they're
Right, and they're
okay for
and
6 days but then the seventh day they're like, oh, they got in a fight at the bar again and ran up the
right.
tab to
It's
200
bar
bucks.
fights and crashing your car and not
Yeah.
showing up to work. And I don't know that I ever fell into any of those categories.
And
Still
same with
don't.
weed. You've come into your own. I think in the last 10 years you smoke a lot more weed now, so maybe you weren't always like this, but I've noticed I don't know very many people like me that smoke weed all the fucking time, and it doesn't. I've never been in the middle of a class and been like, "Whoa, what were we talking about, guys?" It doesn't impact me that way, but when I say that to other people, they're like, "You smoke before you do stuff?" There's people that it would not only have like no benefit for them, but they'd hate that. Kind of like what you said earlier about I'm not trying to pound a 40 first thing in the morning when I get up. To me, that's another genetic benefit that I've never been wired to wake up, and I have woke up at times and felt like, oh, I need a certain drug. Like today, I'll wake up and most of the time I actually feel that way about coffee, which is, cheap and I got tons of it, so no big deal. But
And
I
it's a
I
drug,
don't
right?
wake up and think like, oh, I need beer. It just is. I think that's just luck. It's just how I'm wired up and where I get my
Never have
drivings
either.
from.
So
Yeah.
hopefully my dad passed that on to me and I passed it on to you. It's kind of funny too, because it seems like I don't know that I ever turned you on to Busch Light beer, but it's my
No,
beer of choice now at this time in my life and has been for a while, and it's yours. And I don't know, did I turn you on to Busch Light beer?
probably. I mean, I'm think
Maybe.
I'm different than most guys my age in being able to recognize the dad as hero, and like for me that was really fucking wheelies and driving cars fast, and then that statement earlier about I could drive NASCAR, like yeah, and you'd lose to me. We've always had this push-up competition sort of relationship where I looked up to you, and it's not like you want to be exactly like that person, but yeah, I think that's the
No,
Zach
but like Boyce has
Morrification
got a
of
race. We both
well,
agree with Boyce has got a race if you
yeah,
got a
but you get
chance
you
when you
you
get
get the
together.
good things from your parents that a lot of times you don't notice till later, and maybe I just am more appreciative of them because I got all of my. I like to say I had my midlife crisis at like 19.
Yeah, you had yours early. I had mine later.
Is there anything else you want to add to the dirty part of the interview before we jump into the? That was my pops, Steve Boyce. Thanks to him for coming on. It's always weird when you listen back to a conversation you have with somebody, how you can hear things that you didn't notice in real time. And with my dad, I noticed I kind of talked to him differently than other people, although I can't quite put my finger on how I would describe that. Maybe that respect for parents thing I was talking about earlier or something. I don't know. Anyway, Hope you enjoyed the talk. Love yourselves and the addicted people in your life. I'm Ben Boyce. I was going to start by saying I got three beers, 2 joints, and a Xanax, and a bottle of Kratom over here. You think we got enough to get through this thing, right? But that
I think you're going to be okay, Bill Maher.
you're